All right, welcome. Good morning. Good evening. I'm so used to doing the show in the morning, I forgot what time it is. My name is Michael Robinson, Dr. Michael Robinson. I'm your host of Living Education, Redefining the Narrative. This show is about reclaiming, resetting, reestablishing the definition and the narrative of the African American culture, and we're doing it by bringing the conversations that people believe, many people believe, African Americans do not have. And one of those conversations is what we're going to have today. If you were with me last weekend, I think it was last Saturday, I had the opportunity to speak with two extraordinary individuals about the importance of how to move from your passion of having a business to actually having a business. And I took the approach of looking at how to raise revenue and also how to manage that revenue and that growth of your organization. So I had two guests, Marsha Cover, who's a CEO, founder and CEO of Granite and Style, a fundraising think tank. And I also had Will Holmes from Will Holmes Consulting, a small business consulting firm that helps small businesses and medium-sized businesses maximize their potential and bring in new clients and revenue. So I wanted to continue that conversation and have the conversation and continue around funding. And my guest at that time was Marsha Colbert, who was almost on the verge of letting out the secret that we were going to talk about, specifically fundraising as it relates to generations and culture. And I was able to keep her from spilling the beans, and we have her back tonight to talk about fundraising and developing strategies and what her research has studied. She worked on her doctorate in education at Morgan State University, the Morgan State University. I'm a proud alumnus of that institution. And she's going to bring us that conversation today around developing strategies, but understanding, when you develop your fundraising strategies, what does it look like when you have to take in consideration some other factors like generation, culture, and some of those things. So, uh, without further ado, I'm going to have Marcia come in and tell you a little bit more about her background, and then we can get into our conversation. Marcia, welcome to Living Education, Redefining the Narrative. Please share with our listeners, our followers, our viewers, a little bit about your background, your passion for fundraising, how you got into this line of work.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Mike. Thank you so much for having me on today. I always enjoy our conversation. So thank you very much. I am Marsha Koger, the founder and CEO of Granted in Style. I've been a fundraiser professionally for the past 15, about 15 years actually. Prior to that, I was the deputy press secretary of one of our mayors here, and I spent about 20 years in marketing and communications. Before that, I was a journalist for several newspapers up and down the East Coast. And I really got into fundraising because fundraising is very outcome oriented. And in marketing and communications, it's hard to measure and it's hard to tell what the outcome of a product is. If you send out 10 press releases and you don't get any coverage, it's hard to measure that outcome. So with fundraising, it's easy to measure the outcome because when you work for a nonprofit or work with an organization, if you have a certain amount that you need to raise, if it's 500,000, 800,000, $1 million, then you know that you've reached that goal. It's very measurable and outcome oriented. So I enjoy working with people, so it was a natural transition for me to transition into fundraising. So I love it. I've been fundraising for the past 10, 15 years or so.
All right, so you have a wealth of information and experiences that we can lean on in this conversation today. So, but before we really get into the nuts and bolts of our conversation, share with our viewers a couple of definitions, if you don't mind. So, for example, can you define what really fundraising is, and then talk a little bit about defining culture and generations, because that's that's the crux of our discussion today.
Okay, sure. And I really prefer, in terms of fundraising and the term, I prefer the term philanthropy. And
Okay.
philanthropy really focuses on the donor. I feel like philanthropy focuses on the donor. And in fundraising philanthropy, you want to be donor centered. You want to really present to the donor something they might be interested in funding, and you want to focus on the donor. So that's philanthropy. Also, there's fundraising. Fundraising and development really focus more too on the process of how you get funds. And so philanthropy is more the overall donor, being donor centered and just talking about really getting the money from the donor and making sure that you're creating the opportunity for the donor.
And so, how would you define culture in this whole process of looking and seeking to be donor specific? How does culture play into that?
Okay, culture is basically the behaviors and beliefs that are characteristic of a particular social, ethnic, or age group. For instance, there's the youth culture, there's the drug culture, there is the hip hop culture. That's one definition. And you wanted me to speak about generation. And generation basically is very similar actually to culture, where a generation would be a shared set of shared experiences that one group of individuals have had. Just for instance, if you're part of one generation, you might have experienced the Vietnam War. So that would bind you to a particular generation. And generation is traditionally 20 years apart.
Okay, so we want to talk a little bit about what your research is showing around generations and culture. So but let's go back a little bit, because you introduced a whole new concept to me. I mean, I've heard, and I had the opportunity to work side by side with you, so I know a little bit about what your skills and abilities are. Obviously, you brought many, many more to the organization where we were. I had the opportunity to see you at work, but no, you're saying you have to find those individuals or donors who are philanthropic. How do you find them? So, what would you say to an aspiring or well-established development officer or uh, fundraiser researcher? They don't use that term in that capacity, but what do you say to those people about looking for uh, characteristics of individuals who you define as donors who have this philanthropic um, mindset?
Well, first, again, research is really important to do your research. It's called prospect research, where you're looking for an individual that might be interested in your organization and just basically what you have to offer. So you can research that by Google searching. All kinds of individuals, 990s for organizations are available online. So you really have to do a lot of research. So you research that prospect, but then when they become a donor, you really should start beginning to get information about them. You'll know what their birthday is, so you'll know how old they are. You will know when their anniversary would be. You will know just all kinds of information about them. You'll know what their interests are, if they are really interested in green efforts, if they're interested in pets, if they're interested in the elderly. So it really goes with research and really getting to know your donor. And then when you find out that information, it's important to track it. And we use different software in fundraising, so you really want to track too the individual's interests.
So when you think, we all heard the term student centered, customer centered. So now you introduce a new term to some of us, donor centered.
Mhm.
So in that you kind of say, learn and understand, the nuances of the things of the prospective donor, or actually the donor, because now they have given to you. So
Yeah.
when you say donor centered, what are some examples of and I guess you may have given some, but you would mind, what are some examples of how organizations can move from being the fundraiser, the looking for funds, to being versus looking for the philanthropic individual, and so they can become donor centered?
Well, again, you really know your donor. You have to spend time with them. You have to listen to them. Don't always think about your mission of your organization. If you're an educational institution and you're interested in making sure people we develop scholarships. But after talking to you and really listening to you and getting to know your interests, that might not be your area of interest. You might not want to start a scholarship. You might want to instead invest in a program, or you might want to have an endowed chair at your institution. So it's really just listening and getting to know the donor and being open-minded to that. So you want to, if anything, I want to make sure I offer you something that you're interested in. I'm not going to make you interested in what I want you to be interested in.
So share with me then, because I want to know. I mean, I have
Hmm.
a business. My wife and I have a great company, and we're thinking about going down this road. So now, we have to identify some individuals. How should we layer the whole concept of culture into our donor? prospecting and then into becoming donor centered, how should culture be or an overlay in all of that?
Okay, first, you do have to know culture is an important aspect of fundraising and is an important aspect of an individual's life. I have been studying how Native Americans give and what their attitudes are towards money, as well as how African Americans give, what their attitude is towards money. So, Native American culture, for instance, they really don't like the Native American culture. They don't really like to be highlighted or thanked publicly. They don't want their names on a donor wall. They don't want their names in a book, an annual report, giving them recognition. If anything, they would want the tribe recognized. They're more group centered. They want the tribe recognized, not the individual. Also, too, they really feel like it's offensive if I come straight to you and ask you for a gift for my institution and I look you straight in the eye. That's very offensive to them. Now, on the other hand, for African Americans are very relationship, and this is my research. So, but African Americans are very relationship driven, are face to face. They want the eye contact. So I'll go straight to your house and see you, look you in the face, be direct, and ask you for a gift. So it's really important to understand the culture, and that will impact your strategy for how you ask for a gift.
That's great information, and certainly, hope when your research comes out, people can find some of that information that can help guide them. I had the opportunity to look at one of your PowerPoint presentations, and it
Mhm.
was wonderful. Mark did a great job with that. And you talked about in the very beginning of your PowerPoint, you talked about uh, as wealth transfers into younger hands, the philanthropic interest of the family changes. What do you mean by that?
Well, I've been really seeing that too with a lot of the foundations that are here in Maryland that are a lot of them are family funded foundations.
Mhm.
And a lot of the older parents have had certain things that they're interested in. Maybe this foundation was interested in education and given to educational institutions. But now the transfer of wealth is taking place where that family foundation's money is being handed over to the younger generation. So that strategy, the interests are changing. It's not education anymore. The children are interested in technology. So now that organization foundation is given to technology and not education. So it's really a transfer of wealth and a transfer into younger generations.
So then that's a good segue and transfer into the whole conversation of generations and culture. So when you have that situation where foundations basically have that transfer,
Mhm.
the younger generations now are now overseeing the family business and the family
Right.
distribution of wealth and things of that nature. You know, what are some of the motivations? You talk about that. You say there's some motivations and feelings that are different between the two. What are some of the motivations that you see when you compare differences? Not necessarily generationally right now with the four types of generations, but just overall. When you look at generations, young, old, what were some of the motivating factors why older people may have given versus younger people? And then we get really more specific into those different types of generations you define in your research.
Sure. Well, of course, traditionally, the older generations right now, their giving is more in terms of money. And the younger generations now are doing more in terms of community service and volunteering. And I think that that has to do with the whole community service, volunteer hours that has been incorporated into high school requirements as well as college requirements. So this younger generation that's growing up are really more civic engagement and more community minded, maybe not as money oriented, not yet, compared to the older generation. So that's an overall difference that I've been seeing in terms of the age
So,
difference.
so, so when you talk about the fact that the younger generations who now are kind of pretty much driving the wheel of the foundations in some cases are more civic minded about about doing the hands-on work, getting in volunteering. Does that is that impacting the ability for organizations to get funds from get revenue and grants and things from these organizations? And if
Yeah,
so, how would you suggest they approach an organization or foundation that is more interested in how they can give through physical means more so than through financial means?
Well, that's interesting actually too, and we're talking about two different groups. We're talking about those foundations that are basically public foundations or private foundations that are awarding funds to individuals and nonprofits. But then we're also talking about those donors themselves that are individuals that are awarding funds or major gifts to nonprofits or organizations. So actually, there are two different strategies for the two individuals too that I just mentioned. So I wanted to make that distinction too.
Certainly.
So they're all just different strategies that we use for both groups.
Mhm. So let's talk a little bit about those generations. And I love them. And believe me, I've been tweeting this conversation. I've been on social media pushing this whole concept of these generations that you define, and not that you define these generations because we know they exist, and through our research shows the generations are there. But what I found fascinating was that you have begun to dig and dwell into how these generations view the world. And I think it's obvious how they view the world through how they give. But before we get into that, you talk about those four generations. Can you define a generation for us as it relates to the context of your research?
Okay, let me get my information here. As I mentioned too, that generation is traditionally 20 years apart, is the average amount of time between generations. I also want to say this is very important. This is why this research was important to me. This is the first time in American history, in American work history, that there are four generations working together side by side in the workplace, ever. So that's why I think this conversation is so important, not just in terms of fundraising and philanthropy, but it carries over into leadership management styles. Just so there are all kinds of levels and discussions that need to take place because of this discussion, because of this information right here. So bear with me too. I had a official definition that I can give you about generation. Okay, basically, a generation is defined, excuse me for looking down, but a generation is defined by the common attitudes, experiences, and preferences that develop in the context of social and economic events of a defined period of time. So
Oh,
that is a definition of generation. And again, this is so important because it's the first time there, and in some instances, there are five generations actually that are working together because people are working longer. So, but this is why this is so important.
well, we're talking about something historic here, and certainly, if I'm in an organization that's looking to try to figure out how to get pad or strengthen my bottom line, I want to look at your research and say, how do I develop strategies to reach into all four, if not all five generations, to get those funding. Uh, and we know that those donors fall into those five generations and those four generations you talked about, and also those donors fall into foundation overseeing foundations. When you say that's true.
That's correct. That is absolutely correct. It goes back to again what we initially talked about, that whole generational transfer of wealth. So you're absolutely right.
So share with us those generations. And boy, I mean, sometimes you find yourself on the cusp of some of both of them. But talk about the four generations that you say for the first time in American history are basically working side by side, and that's important because if they're working side by side and they have different ways of looking at funding, you have to be a very diverse uh, strategist to gather their attention. So before we get too far fetched, what are those generations that you have defined in your study?
Okay, there's the traditionalist generation. They also are called the veterans or the silent generation. Those are individuals that were born between 1922 and 1945. There's the baby boomer generation. Those individuals were born between 1946 and 1964. There's Generation X, individuals born between 1965 and 1980. and Generation Y, also called the millennials. They were born between 1981 and 2000.
Okay, so we're on the verge of, and looking at what and hearing what you said, that we're on the verge of that generation from 2001 to 2000 and I guess 20 or 21, um, actually coming into existence because people enter the workforce around 18, so
Right.
that generation is on the verge of actually showing up in a couple of
Yes.
years. Obviously, the traditionalists may fall off because they will put them way beyond retirement ages, but you may still have those. So talk to us a little bit on how these generations could impact management, leadership, and philanthropy.
Okay, management, leadership, philanthropy, it is impacted in terms of how each generation communicates. One generation might be used to using the telephone. The older generation of traditionalists, they like using the phone, or they're interested in writing a memo, where, as you can imagine, Generation X and Generation Y are used to communicating through the internet, are used to communicating through email. So then, if you're a fundraiser, you have to really know which generation you're speaking to, which generation are your donors, because you might, for Generation X and Y, you might send them an email asking for funding, but for the traditionalist generation, they might get snail mail or a letter. So it impacts itself in terms of communications styles as well as in even work style. Usually the millennials, the younger generation, everything is integrated and combined in terms of their work. If they're on the beach, they're working. So they combine work and play, where traditionalist generation and even baby boomers are used to going to work 9 to 5. They work 9 to 5, and then when they get off from work, they go home and then they're at home. So they really make a distinction between their work life and their private life. Excuse me. So it really has an impact in a whole lot of different ways.
So talk, take your time, get some water. This is a fascinating conversation. And then when you get back, talk about how the traditionalists, those who were born um, up until I think it's 1945, talk a little bit about how they are financially. How do you describe them from a financial perspective, and how do you see them dealing with money?
Okay, the traditionalist generation, they paid for items in cash. When dealing with money, they believed in putting it away and saving. So if they're going to pay for items with cash, then that translates too into their giving. I've interviewed several folks that are from the traditionalist generation, and they basically said that they might not come and go to an event, or they might not volunteer, but they'll write a check. They'll pay for things with cash. They'll write a check. So that has an impact on their attitudes towards money, as well as their attitudes towards philanthropy.
So when you see traditionalists, you
Hmm.
know, what how should well how do they view education? How do traditionalists usually look at the whole concept of education?
Well, for them, higher education was a dream come true. So
Mhm.
for them, higher education was the great equalizer. A lot of them, in particular African Americans, we only had access to HBCU. These were people who were born before the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So for them, higher education was a dream come true.
Let me kind of run through some of these other three generations because we have about 5 or 6 questions that have come through Facebook and Twitter. I
Oh.
certainly want to answer them because they're there. Some I sent you in advance because people had sent the questions earlier. But
Hmm.
I certainly want to be able to run through. I think talk a little bit about baby boomers. Who are baby boomers, and how do they view money, and how do they do giving, and then that gives and how that should be framed. How you reach out to them and become so they can be and focus them on donors.
Okay, right now too, the baby boomers are the largest generation right now that exists in the country. This is the largest number in terms from the United States Census. The baby boomers were born during the civil rights. They were born during the women's movement and also Vietnam War. they grew up actually where the mother worked outside of the house. So also they grew up in an area of prosperity, optimism, and safety. They are highly competitive micromanagers. They will do whatever it takes to get the job done. They like power and authority and achievement. They're workaholics, are self-centered. They seek consensus and are adept at networking. And higher education was a given, unlike the traditionalists where higher education was a dream come true. Now, technology was introduced and developed during this generation, and in terms of money and also giving, they believe in buy now and pay later. This was buy now and pay later was the big generation.
Right. Okay. Well, so then how do you suggest that uh, the development officer, development officers, the the fundraising department approach baby boomers, donors who are in that baby boomer generation?
Okay, the baby boomer too can basically connect with the old and the young. And there is one set of this generation too that I call the bridge generation. And those are the individuals who are 50-ish, that basically can connect the younger hip hop generation and the older traditionalist generation. But the baby boomers can connect, you can communicate to them through technology. This technology was introduced, so you can communicate with them through email, but you can also do the mailing of the letter. So they're a generation that's in the middle of the two strategies of fundraising. And depending on the individual, everything can apply to this generation.
How do people define, or how do I determine if a person's, I don't, if I don't know you, how do I know what generation you fall in? Is there some kind of way to figure that out without offending
So,
someone?
sure, with most people, you basically your birth date. That a lot of times you will know when a person's birthday is, and possibly the entire birthday, what year were you were born. And again, the research that you do as a fundraiser, I will know exactly your birth date and what year you were born. And that's really important because one of the things that I do in most of my positions that I've held in fundraising, I'll send you a birthday card. So, and people like that. That's part of me cultivating you, sending you a birthday card every year on your birthday. So I'll know what generation you're from by your birthday and your birthday.
Yeah, and you said cultivate, and I think that's a very important term here as it relates to fundraising. We'll go back to that, so I don't want us to not think about that in certain conversation. And I also want you to share a comment you made in our last discussion about the about fundraising, uh, being donor centered, looking for those philanthropic individuals with more of an art with an art and a science. We'll talk a bit about that. But let's just go to that third generation and
Mhm.
uh, the Generation X. What can you tell us about Generation X? Who they are and how they give.
Okay, Generation X, for them, both of their parents were in the workforce. Now, this is important because they had to learn independence, they're self reliant, and also a lot of them were latchkey kids. They are independent, entrepreneurial, just that's very strong, very entrepreneurial, skeptical, question authority, are less trusting, and impatient. So,
Let
again,
me,
with
let me
this,
check. Does my daughter fall into that? I'm just kidding. I'm just,
no, you fall into that, actually. So,
go ahead.
you know, so with that, okay, so if you know they're going to be skeptical, independent, skeptical, so that's that age group, you have to really make sure you're explaining to them, okay, you're giving a certain amount of money, it's going to what? You have to be real clear where the funding is going to go and that it's earmarked to where they want the funding to go. It is important that you ask them for feedback because if you don't, they'll feel like they're being ignored. They want to make a difference and focus on they also focus on service to the community. They don't take no for an answer, have high standards, they do things their own way regardless of the rules. They're cautious, conservative, and they believe in saving. So the two things that are very important, the amounts might not be as large as with a baby boomer because they're a little more cautious, and that you have to really make sure you tell them where their funding is going to.
That's great. And then, Marsha, your last generation, in the four you were defined for your study, Generation Y, millennials. Talk
Yes.
about who they are, how they give, and then they're the ones that are out there now. And this generation is going to be in the in the giving pipeline for quite a while. So we want to talk about, does time change what they are now versus what they will be, but define generation Y and millennials for us and what that looks like as far as giving is concerned.
Okay, I love all the generation, but I love this generation. The parents have nurtured them. They have high levels of confidence, and they expect immediate feedback and continuous recognition.
That's what I have.
Well,
That's what
yeah.
I have. All right, all right.
Yes. They are excellent multitaskers, are usually well educated. Computers and technology have always been a part of their lives. That's very important in terms of communicating. And we're going to communicate through the cell phone, mobile device, Facebook, Twitter. They have their core values are they're very realistic. They have high confidence. They like to have fun, very social. And when dealing with money, their motto is they earn to spend. So they really enjoy spending money. So this generation is very important. And actually, they really believe in service more than any other generation. And in some instances, this service is translating into them giving money. There are several organizations actually that exist that are called Millennial Givers. There's an organization in DC, and it's headed by a woman. Her name is Ebony. And she actually is really doing a lot with this generation and encouraging them to give, and not just give in terms of volunteering, but to give.
Great, great, and we're going to come back to generations. But you talked a little bit in one of your presentations about generations and the people who are philanthropic. What do you mean by that? You talk about pre-war generations and who gives more. Share with us those people who are out there who are looking to build strategies to increase their funding streams. What did you mean by that pre-war generation?
Okay, the generation that is before the traditionalists, the
I believe so. I think what you call
the
them.
generation that call them mature generation, and are who are actually 68 and above, and they are very philanthropic. But for generation I just mentioned, the traditionalists are the ones who are giving the most. They are giving, they are writing that check, and they're
So
just giving the most to the community and to nonprofit organizations.
so 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 here we are. This is living education, redefining the narrative. We're focusing on reclaiming, reestablishing, rewriting the narrative of African Americans, particularly in the area of education. And this is important because we know organizations and small businesses are the heart, to include small nonprofits who hire people, are the heart and the soul of how to get the economy growing and particularly would be the pathway to decrease African American unemployment. What are you finding when you look at generations? Let probably should put you there. What are you finding when you look at these generations and you look at people of color, African Americans? How does that play a role in these generations in giving?
Okay, my study is I'm focusing on Generation X and the baby boomers. And I'm talking to Native Americans as well as African Americans that are from Generation X and the baby boomers. And I'm seeing totally different feelings and attitudes and behaviors concerning money. The Generation X, and I'm seeing those differences too in terms of culture. And I have divided my study too between those individuals that were born pre-civil rights, 1964, before 1964, 1964, and then post-civil rights. And the Generation Xers are post-civil rights after 1964, and the baby boomers are pre-civil rights before 1964. And I made that distinction because, in particular, with that older generation, the traditionalists, they're the generation, most of them just went to HBCUs, but the Generation X's had more choices in terms of school choices, could go to
Mhm.
private white institutions, predominantly private PWIs, predominantly private white institutions, and had more choices educationally. So I'm seeing a difference in terms of giving. For instance, that generation, the younger who maybe attended the Harvards and the Yale, are giving back to the Harvards and the Yale, giving money. they actually are saying that culture does not have as much of an impact as that older generation, that traditionalist, the baby boomer generation. Baby boomer generation is saying that culture does have an impact. They are given to the HBCUs. They belong to the NAACP. This Generation X, younger generation, they don't belong to the NAACP. Another fact that I'm seeing in research, a lot of research, of course, says traditionally African Americans we've given to our church.
Yes.
And that's another statistic that I'm seeing that's different. That for the younger generation, that Generation X, that's post civil rights, that the church has not played as big of a role as that baby boomer generation. That these younger individuals, they might attend church, but their giving is not primarily to their church. Again, they're given to their Harvards or Yales, and they're not primarily given to the church. So for this younger generation, culture is not having as much of an impact on them as the older generation, the baby boomers. So that's one difference, very clear and distinct, just very clear. I'm doing a qualitative study, ethnographic study, and I've talked to about 10 individuals, and they all have said exactly the same thing. It's been very, very, very clear that I see that so clear as a difference.
Mhm. So let's go, and I'll come back to some other questions I have based off your presentation I saw. But one of the things was one of the questions we got from Facebook that I had an opportunity to send to you was, in order for nonprofits or any organization to target the unique sensitivities and behaviors of a generational demographic, it will take a lot of research from their organization. If true, then how can organizations with little resources or experiences in this area do this effectively?
Okay, again, back to the point I mentioned earlier about the prospect research. It's important to do your research and prospect research, and there are all types of tools that are free that are available. Google, just I Google everything, everybody. You can get so much information from Google. So you can use a Google to find information about someone as well as an organization. There are 990s that are available right online that you can go to. Of course, too, there's all types of software that you can pay for. There's one that's Wealth Engine that you can buy and purchase. But just really doing research and just starting with doing research on the internet is how you can get information about individuals and organizations.
Okay, so I think that was from uh, Jessica. I won't say the last name. Jessica S. We'll leave it at that.
Okay,
I hope
Jessica.
Jessica got her question answered. Next question. In researching this topic, I read that the proliferation of new communication channels and rapid evolution of digital technologies have made interpreting the generational landscape more confusing today than ever before. Do you agree with this? Or if so, why? If not, why not?
Okay, I do. Excuse me, too. I had to do a little technology thing. I do agree with this. I do think that this can be confusing, and you do need to interpret the generational landscape, and it can be confusing. But again, if you do understand your different generations, if you really understand your donors, then you can navigate that landscape a little bit better, but it can be confusing.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And so when you see that level of confusion, when you work as a consultant, and I think people should know that you are available for consultation, consulting for organizations who are looking to employ strategies around your research, and certainly make sure at the end of our conversation you share how they can reach out to you. But
Sure.
when in your past experiences, when you have seen organizations who have struggled in trying to determine, who we go after, who we find as donors, and you see they're struggling with that. What are some of the characteristics? And this may be, a little unfair in some cases, maybe. What are some of the characteristics of those organizations that tend to struggle the most with incorporating different strategies to reach out to funders or potential donors?
Well, two things. First of all, I do feel like it's really important for the organization to have their strategic plan.
I think we may have lost Marsha. Marsha, you there? Are you there? Let's give her a moment to get back. You know how technology is, and on the East Coast we have a variety of these freezers, and I won't say who my carrier is, so I don't want to say anything disparaging about that person. But hopefully Marsha will be back and finish this conversation. I want to say that while we're waiting on Miss Coker to come back and join us, that we have some upcoming shows that I think you will find of interest. Now we're pretty much wrapping up the first year of our redefining the narrative campaign. This is a 3-year campaign that we started this past fall, and we began with a look of looking at different topics, educational conversations. And our first attempt was we brought a new perspective in different educational topics. We had our publication was a special publication, and we had all African American male writers, and it was a wonderful publication. It has received great reviews. It has done extremely well. All the writers were exceptional. They came from various backgrounds in education, housing, academic research, and they did great work. And I would strongly recommend for those who are just hearing about this to go to our website www.forceoftherain.net and visit e-publication tab, and there's a drop-down list of menu of all the magazines, and you will see the special edition. You don't want to miss it. Now we're wrapping up what would be the first year of the campaign, and we'll come back in the fall with part two of our 3-year campaign of redefining the narrative. And I don't want to tell you the big surprise we have in year two, but trust me, it's going to be something significant, and it's going to make a difference, and it's going to redefine the narrative, continue our efforts to redefine the narrative, to take back the perceptions that people, the false perceptions, the misperceptions that people have of African Americans, particularly as it relates to education. There's this misnomer that we don't care about education, and we actually are a very passionate culture and community about education, as we all. And then, then we'll come back in our third year, and we'll talk about that. I also want to mention that this will be the 7th year that I may be losing track myself, the 7th or 8th year of National Men Make a Difference Day, which is an event I created when I worked in one of the largest school districts in the country. An event where we encourage fathers and significant male role models to come out and enjoy a conversation and engage in a relationship with their children in school. Visit their classroom, observe their instruction, participate in school activities, join a local PTA or whatever formal parent group you have there. We encourage dads to turn this one day of engagement to a lifetime of involvement, and we have been doing this for the past several years. And in our first year at the school district we were in, we had 10,000 fathers come out that day on that one single day, and what we saw was that engagement of that involvement that one day continued to be something that was that continued on even after that event. And so we know when you invite dads to the party, they come wholeheartedly, and it's great. It's a great show. It's a great day. So this year, Men Make a Difference Day falls on October 13th, 2014, and we're going to have some big things, and we hope you can support in your local school district in your area. Men Make a Difference Day. Now we'll be wrapping up our summer program, our fall and spring programming, and getting ready for our summer programming, which will focus primarily on a summer campaign that we have going around the importance of early reading. We hope you can join us in our discussions. We'll have some Google Hangouts, we'll have some Twitter chats, and we'll have some educational views all around the whole issue of early reading and the importance of early reading. So with that, we have a lot of stuff ahead of us, and we're looking forward to being able to have a great summer event. So I don't think we're gonna be able to bring Miss Coker back.
I said give it one more minute.
Okay.
She's got a thunderstorm there.
Okay, well that's what happened. There was a thunderstorm that took place with Miss Coker, which is in Baltimore, Maryland, and so she'll be back with us once that storm passes by. So hang tight. Give us another minute, and I can try to entertain you with some more information about what we do here at Force of the Rain Productions. Through our Live Education eMagazine, our Live Education eNetwork, we have radio stations, all those things. So just Google us or visit our website, www.forceoftherain.net, and you can find a whole bunch of information about what we do, who we are, and how you can get access to educational research information that typically will cost you money to access. You're not doing that here, so stay tuned, get connected. Oh, one thing I failed to mention, I'm excited about is that probably one of our last Google Hangouts in this subject area will be on the issue of women in education. I'm going to have a Dr. Venus Evans Winters, I believe I got that correct, who will be coming on the show to talk about African American women in education. We've seen the tragedy in Nigeria, and we know what those young ladies go through. We know historically what women of color, these women across the world, and what women of color go through to who aspire to be educated, who want to education. We're going to talk about what that looks like, the challenges that women have, particularly women of color who want to pursue education. And actually, even in a country where education is not necessarily prevented from being achieved by women, particularly women of color, what happens after they've earned that degree? What are some of the challenges and difficulties many of them have in finding, securing employment? We're going to talk about that with Dr. Dr. Venus Evans Winters. Look her up. She's on Facebook. She's phenomenal. You will enjoy her Facebook posts, her books. I plan to read one before she gets on the show. So please do that. I hope you have enjoyed our conversation today. We're going to give Ms. Koger a few more minutes with the storm pass in Baltimore. But you understand the importance of why we've had this conversation, why we've been having this conversation. And that is that we have to have to move beyond just discussion and having conversations to having conversations that lead to implementation of people's strategies, dreams, mission, and vision that can go in and make a difference in our community. We know the problems. The problems have been defined day after day, moment after moment, minute after minute. We know what they are. There's not a problem that we don't know, we haven't heard, we know about. The point that we really need to talk about now is what's the solution? How do we go from defining these problems to getting solutions and getting them from people who are on the ground, who are there making a difference, who are not in the ivory tower, but who are in the trenches, who are down there doing the grinding? How do we ensure that their vision, their dreams are coming through? So I want to move away from just bringing people on and regurgitating what the problems were, what the issues are, how, oh, woe is me. I want to move away from that. I want to get to, hey, here are some strategies. You have a vision. You want to start your own nonprofit. You're concerned about how to raise funds. You want to know how to start a nonprofit, how to go and get your 501c3. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about what that is. Let's network around there so we can get your vision up and get you moving into the direction of solutions and problem solving, and creating opportunities for you to bring staff on and hire people. That's how we're going to reduce the 12.3%, it probably will be higher, unemployment rate for African Americans by creating small businesses who in turn hire individuals in the community. But we can't do that if we don't move beyond the discussion of what the problems are. We need bold solutions. We need bold recommendations. But when we know people bring those bold solutions and recommendations to the table, they need to know how to move forward with them. What are the strategies? What are the ways to get funding? How do you build your infrastructure? You have an organization that has 2 people. You want to move it to the next year to hire 3 more people. That's why we had William Holmes on the show last weekend to talk about growth development, how to expand your organization, how to reach out and get contracts through the government contracts, how to look at those non-traditional things. One of the shows we'll be doing in part 2 of the campaign is looking at contractual opportunities. Where can you go, your organization go and find grants? And what I mean by that is, and I guess I'll count the bag a little bit, is when we're talking about some of these organizations, these opportunities for funding, where there are a lot of organizations who look like us, where other people of color operated in. So, for example, let's talk about the issue of fair housing. Did you know the Department of Housing and Urban Development offers grants and it's well over 130 organizations that are receiving millions of dollars to do fair housing investigation, fair housing education and outreach, and very few of those are organizations operated by individuals of color. This is an opportunity for organizations to look at this avenue, to go in there and offer this service, to become an organization that can do education outreach around housing discrimination and learn how to investigate housing discrimination. And we can begin to build those organizations in our communities. Same thing for foster care. A lot of the foster care organizations are not foster organizations that are operated and manned by individuals of color. So we're going to bring this show, we're going to bring this topic on in year two in our part two of our campaign, because we want to move beyond. It's important to move beyond the constant complaining and describing of what the problems are, and move into more about how organizations can be created, funded, structured, developed, grown, so we can address some of these issues. If we're saying that part of the problem in Chicago has nothing to do, but we know that we can find funding to create, one-stop, recreational programs and services, if that's what's needed there, if that's the solution, then how do we get there? How do we get there? We get there by funding the organizations like the Black Star Project and many others who are in Chicago. And I don't want to slight anyone. I just happen to know Philip Jackson. There's no slight, because I know there's hundreds and hundreds of organizations in Chicago that are on the ground making a difference every day. Funding makes a difference for them. They can hire more people. They can hire the young people, get them to work. So I want to get away from talking about the problem, because I don't think I need to spend another day talking about the problem. Because I'm well embedded with the problems. We know them. I've read them. You have. We all have. So now it's talking about how do we go to solving the problem. Where are the people who can put the issue to the table, and how do we get them the funding they need to go there? So that's what's coming up in part two of redefining the narrative, and I think that's an important subject. Economic development is the engine that drives America. Is also the engine that drives the African American community. We have $1 trillion in disposable income, and that we use and spend. Some of that can be spent in our own infrastructure, our own organization, our own services. But we also know there are so many different ways to build organizations and programs, and that so much of the information is not shared, it's not distributed to different communities. I guarantee you, most of you had no idea that there were organizations out there receiving funding to do fair housing investigation, but there are, and you need to know about them, because you could be one of them. So enough of my soapbox, and I hope you were able to hang with me for a few minutes. We're gonna spend a few more minutes because Marsha's back. The storm's over in Baltimore. The sun
Yes,
is
thank
shining.
you.
Rainbows out there. Marsha, welcome back to Living Education, Redefining the Narrative.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael.
Okay, so I think where we left off, and I'm not quite sure where we left off because I rambled on and things, but can you talk a little bit about some of the generational gaps that you identified in your presentation a while back?
Okay, some of those gaps again there are communications gaps. And can you I guess explain a little bit more what you're looking for in terms of an answer?
Well, I guess I'm trying to figure out when you talk about generations, what are some of the things that might be falling through the crack? Where are the gaps between the generations that may allow an organization to say, okay, well, that like you mentioned the bridge generation. Do you see those type of gaps? Because that bridge generation, I'm understanding your definition to mean that they kind of bridge between being in the hip hop generation for an extent to being also part of that baby boom, because they grew up with the rap music, and
Right.
they continue to enjoy the rap music, so they know the history of it. They enjoy it, and yet so they can relate, and you can almost approach them from a hip hop perspective, as long as it's not offensive. So that's what I mean by some of the gaps.
Okay, that's fabulous. And that is exactly right, that those individuals that are born at the very end of a generation and that will go into the next generation, a lot of times that generation is called a bridge generation. So right
Okay.
now, currently, that bridge generation actually are those individuals that are about in their 50s or so. They're bridging the gap between the traditionalists and baby boomers and Generation X and Y. And sometimes those gaps, in particular, some of our younger kids, I have two young teenagers, our younger kids that are part of the millennials or younger, there's a big gap that exists between that generation and maybe that traditionalist or that older baby boomer generation, that there are gaps in music. That older generation doesn't understand the rap music, feels like, oh, rap is too loud, and it's just they don't really understand what's going on with the music. So a lot of times there's a gap, there's a communication gap. That generation might use slang words, and that older generation doesn't really understand that what they're saying, basically. So there's a communication gap many times. And this bridge generation is a generation that can really bridge that gap between the older individuals and those younger folks. They actually, a lot of times, that bridge generation, they were born at the beginning of hip hop music. And actually, I'm part of this bridge generation, so I see it. I see this exemplified in my own life. So that generation was born right at the beginning of hip hop, so they can communicate with the Generation Y, Generation X. At the same time, they were born at the very end of that baby boomer, so they can communicate with the baby boomer and the traditionalist. So in particular, in terms of communication, this generation, that bridge generation, can really bridge the gap between both of the generations in terms of giving, and that can manifest itself. Then from there, it manifests itself in terms of fundraising. If I'm part of the baby boomer and most of my donors are part of Generation Y, the millennials, then I need to know that, because there are certain things that I might need to do to communicate with that generation to really encourage them and hope that they give to my organization.
That's a great
So the main
segue.
gap that I see is communication gap.
Okay, and that's a great segue into the next question, because the next question kind of focused on baby boomers. We got this via Twitter, so there's a couple of tweets here we put together.
Mm-hmm.
Baby boomers are significant to any fundraising effort of any organization. What generational demographic is next in line for a return in a fundraising campaign, and why? So you talked about right now. You said the traditionalists are the ones who are giving the most, and those baby boomers kind of are in between, that bridge between the generations. What next to the traditionalists and the baby boomers, who are the generations that are giving, that where if I'm an organization, I might want to center some of my attention on right now?
So that Generation X, again, that generation, they were born between 1965 and 1980. That Generation X, they're conservative, they believe in saving, but at the same time, they're very entrepreneurial. And if you notice with many organizations, and even just if you look in the country, most times the entrepreneur is a person that does have wealth, and that person who does have extra discretionary income to give to a nonprofit or give to an organization, educational institution. So really that Generation X is really a generation that fundraisers need to be paying very close attention to. So I believe that they are the next in line. That again, individuals born between 1965 and 1980. And it's different. They're different. Again, back to the culture piece. These are the individuals that were born post civil rights. So these individuals are maybe not looking at culture. So if you're HBCU, or if you are a regular organization, nonprofit that might not be focused on culture and has a certain concern, maybe it's in the environment, maybe again it could be pets, it could be young children. There's a generation in the age group that might give to your organization regardless of if it's culture based or related.
So the next question we got was, what are some of the different characteristics that each generation has that one uses to get the attention to give? Now, you were able to talk about the characteristics. You define, the ages and some mores to them. But this one asks a good question. What are some of the ways to get their attention? You know, a little more detail. Just exactly what can we do to draw the attention of Generation Y, Generation X.
Well, and when I talked about the different characteristics, again, that communication piece is very important. The Generation X, Generation Y, they communicate a little bit differently. They'll communicate through email. They communicate through mobile phone. There needs to be some text messaging efforts in terms of fundraising. That would really be effective and impactful for Generation Y. So communication is a real big one. And then in some of the generations, I talked about how feedback was very important. That Generation X, they want feedback. Generation Y, they want to be able, these are the two generations, X and Y, they're used to giving their opinions on Facebook and Twitter and used to just being heard. So it's important maybe to have focus groups, to maybe have them involved with the organization as volunteers. So those are some of the things, really looking at those characteristics of all the generations can help in your fundraising strategies. So those are just some examples.
I was just going to ask you, would you recommend organizations to kind of have a little bit of this diversity that you see in the potential in the potential donors, and did you think that you should have some of that diversity in your fundraising or your development department?
Oh, absolutely. That's very, very important. In particular, if you are, suppose you're trying to engage African Americans. If you're African Americans, traditionally in terms of culture, are very relationship driven. So if you're trying to, that's a demographic that you're going after by far. You should ideally have an African American fundraiser on your staff because that person can relate more to an African American who comes and asks them for money as opposed to some other culture. The same thing with the Native American. The same thing too with Asians. I've spent some considerable time in the Korean community. And the Korean community, I'm here in Maryland, and actually I spent 1 year in that community going to all their different restaurants and really learning about their culture. And I was told that the Asian community, one way that they'll become involved in your community, your organization, is if they have someone on their board, that it was important for them to have some voice in terms of leadership, that a voice and a person that looks exactly like them. One of the things too that the Asian community said that they would give to a building. They give to things, a building, a statue. So it's very important to have your staff reflect and be reflective of your donor base as well. So that's very important.
So, this person wrote on Facebook, I researched and found crowdfunding and peer-to-peer fundraising. Not sure what that is exactly. Or gaining traction, largely with Generation X and Y. However, there are many crowdfunding campaigns launched and either fail or do not reach the goal intended. What should be done to ensure success in a crowdfunding campaign?
Okay, crowdfunding basically are those websites such as Kickstarter. Kickstarter is Kickstarter.com, where if you have something that you're trying to raise funds for, if you are a student and you want to do a travel abroad trip, so you might start a crowdfunding page, and you basically set that up. You put an amount to it, how much your trip costs, and the success of that will depend on who you market and send your message to. Fundraising, is really important that you start with your base, or those that portion of people who really know you. So with crowdfunding, you want to start with your friends, your parents' friends, your relatives, people who really know you. So if you send somebody an email and said, I need some support for a trip that I'm taking abroad, if they're a family member, a relative, somebody who knows you, just those people around you who have been with you that support you, they will support your cause. So it's important to start with your base, or those individuals that traditionally support you, your extended family, those individuals that know you. Also, the definition of peer-to-peer fundraiser, that basically means that a person who's asking you for funding is a peer. If I am a student and I'm interested in other students giving me funding, so that's peer-to-peer. I'm your peer. If I'm on a certain level, and this is really important in fundraising, if I'm a president and CEO of an organization and I'm interested in maybe donating to an organization, I want the president and CEO of that organization to ask me for the funds. That's peer-to-peer. I don't want possibly the fundraising director. I don't want someone, the secretary, administrator. I want someone who's a peer that I will more likely give to another peer. So that peer-to-peer fundraising is very important and very important to incorporate in any fundraising strategy.
So given the importance of that peer-to-peer, those Kickstarters or crowdfunding, what have you seen to be, some of the reasons why they are not successful?
They are not successful. I think sometimes the amount that they're asking for might be too much. You have to really be realistic. And again, you're thinking about people who know you, your friends and family. So you should have a sense of the income and amount that they have. So they might have their goal being too much. If your trip is $3,000 and you don't think that your family and friends can give you $3,000, you might need to set a more realistic goal. Also, those programs that aren't successful sometimes are those ones that just don't seem fundable. It has to be really credible, again, something that I keep talking about passion, but something that you feel passionate about, that you think would be worthy of asking somebody to fund you. So that's really important. So sometimes it might be a project that's just unrealistic. On crowdfunding, I might decide I want to lose weight and I want to raise some funds to get a treadmill in my house. That's not a good project to look for funding for. So it needs to be a real credible program that you're trying to raise funds for, and it should be in a realistic amount.
That's good advice. I've seen some of these crowds, and I have supported some. I mean, people I knew, I gave bucks to. But some of the ones I see, I don't know who they are. I don't know how legitimate it is. I don't know if it's going to go where the person says it's going to go. So for that reason, I have some issues with it because it is credibility. So I think good points. You have to have some credibility around what it is. If I can find you, 2 weeks from now, on where I need to find you, I may say, okay, let me see if you're here a month from now, and then be willing to maybe cough up a couple of bucks. But I tend to give the people I know, and I think you're at a point, the peer-to-peer is important. If I am the CEO of a company, I prefer that my other CEO of the company, tell me they need it, because we're in a different arena, so it should come that way. Marsha, we talked a lot about generations, culture, how to reach out to them. Basically, what does it all mean? I mean, really, what does it all mean to those people who are out here, who have organizations that are trying to fund, who are looking to start an organization and will need to go out and fundraise, look for those philanthropic individuals and become donor centered? What does all we just talked about today really mean to them?
Okay, first you really need to understand what generation you belong to. If you're the fundraiser for an organization, know what generation you belong to, know what generation your donors belong to, and make sure you're really being donor-centered. So by knowing and understanding the generations, you can tailor your ask. Again, tailoring your ask will determine what you ask for, even where to ask, how much you should ask for, if you really know that generation of that donor. For instance, if your potential donor is a millennial, then you might ask through Facebook or Twitter. Again, we talked about the way people, different generations communicate. If your potential donor is a baby boomer, it may be important time for you to spend time with him and explain how your organization is meeting a societal or community need. So again, it's important to understand what generation you belong to, what generation your donors belong to, that you're being donor-centered, and it can impact how you ask for funding for your organization.
Marsh, I want to thank you for coming in, talking about us, and we got a few seconds, so I want to go back to something I said. I want to get from you. Talk a bit what you meant by fundraising is an art and a science.
Okay. Fundraising is an art and a science because there's a science to this. It's just like in sales that fundraising, the science of it is there are basically 4 levels of donors. There's your discovery phase. That's when you're doing your prospect research, and this is the science of fundraising. When you're doing your prospect research and you're really trying to discover who your donors are. There is the cultivation stage. I know I talked about cultivation before. Cultivation is when you do those things to basically get your donor who's engage more. Cultivation might be to engage that donor in volunteering. They might end up sitting on your board. That's when I send those birthday cards, when I send your anniversary card, when I bring you a Coke because you like Coca-Cola. So that's cultivating you. They're all the things, and a donor should definitely be touched at least 7 times. That's part of the cultivation period. Touch could be a thank you note, could be a phone call. When I call a thank you, that's cultivation. The third stage is solicitation. That's when I actually start asking you for a gift or ask you to increase or extend your gift. And the fourth stage is stewardship. And stewardship is when after you've given and you've given that gift, that's when I steward you and keep talking to you and make sure you're engaged and make sure you're volunteering and making sure that you're happy. So those are the different stages of fundraising and the different stages that are very important in raising funds for an organization. I hope I answered your question.
Oh, you more than answered the question, and you gave valuable information to those who are watching and who will download this later. So, Marcia, I want to again thank you for coming on the show. Sorry about the technical difficulty. Again, we couldn't do anything about Mother Nature, but this was an important subject, and I think you closed it out in a great way by giving those steps about fundraising. Because what has always been my concern is, do we give the people in the community enough information to go out and be successful in fulfilling their dreams and their mission? And I think today we did that. I think we accomplished that today with you, Marcia. So again, thank you for coming on the show. Marcia, before we close out, can you share with the viewers how they can reach out to you, how they can find you, they want to bring you in for some consulting? How can they reach out to you? Where are you located in this vast world we call the internet?
Okay, I'm located in Maryland, but of course I'm available virtually. I'm available to come and travel and see you as well. And the best way to reach out to me is through email, and my email address is grantedinstyle@gmail.com, and it's grantedinstyle@gmail.com. That's the best way to get in touch with me. I can provide some consultation for you, and I am available to help you with your nonprofit, starting, with growing, developing your organization.
Great, Marcia. Again, thank you for coming on the show. It's been wonderful. I always enjoy our conversations.
Yeah, thank you.
They're always rich. You're such a wonderful person. And I know we'll be back. We'll have this conversation in part 2, the year 2 of the campaign. There's so much more to talk about, and you have such a wealth of information. And I do know that we're trying to work a way to get you to do a presentation out here in the area, so people who did not see the show can come and sit down and have a conversation with you. So we're working on that, and hopefully that's something that happens over the summer. And I know you are amenable to that being the case.
Yes.
Again, this has been a wonderful show. Marcia Koger is a dear friend of the show, a dear friend of the organization, and this has been a great discussion on the importance of developing, funding strategies, cultivating donors, become a donor-centered organization so you can maximize the giving that these individuals are, but also understanding culturally how individuals give, and then also within their culture where they fall along the spectrum of generations. Generations give differently. Culturally, people give differently. Developing diverse funding streams and strategies to help cultivate those donors and to give to your organization, not just short term, but long term, is a skill, it's an art. And one of the persons who are best at talking about it and doing it is on our show today, Marcia Coker. So I hope you look out, reach out, find Marcia. She's all over the Facebook, all over Twitter. You can find her. She'll be a Dr. Coker soon, so the price will go up when she becomes Dr. Coker. So I strongly suggest you get it while it's affordable, because once you become Dr. Coker, you got to pay that tuition fee attached to that presentation.
Oh,
This has been Living Education, Redefining the Narrative. I'm your host, Dr. Mike Robinson. Join us next week, same time, same channel, same center, focused conversations, redefining the narrative. As I always say, when I'm closing out my show, God bless, peace and love.
thank you.
Thanks, Marcia.
Thank you, Dr. Mike.
Take care.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for all your work.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
for your work. You take
Thank
care.
you.